So without further ado, I will hand over to Chris, and Chris is going to really basically show all of us, me included, how to be more successful with winning tenders. No pressure on you. Now, just one thing here, you're going to have to be quick, right? Because what Chris is going to do is he's going to offer the first four people, right, a free tender consultation, free 30-minute tender consultation, so he can maybe review something with you, give away a couple of secrets. So the first four people that contact Chris, and I'm sure Chris will give out his contact details in the fullness of time. So be ready. First four, just giving you a heads up. Chris, before we start, one question that I've got, and you can maybe weave this into the presentation, because I'm sure with a lot of the people that are new to this are going to ask, is when it comes to tendering and small businesses in particular going for tenders, is it a level playing field between the small businesses and the big boys?
Yeah, it's a very, very important question, actually. So there's a couple of bits to this, I think. So when you see opportunities, there's a little line that says suitable for SMEs. And usually if that's ticked yes, it's obviously suitable for SMEs, and it could be just in terms of the requirement, the value of the contract. So say the value of the contract was £2 million, and you're an SME with a turnover, of £100,000, that would significantly change your business, and there's a risk associated. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is that if I look at it from a local perspective, so like local councils and things like that, they've got targets around local SMEs winning work, and social values becoming more and more important, and regional development. So whilst if you look at it from holistically, I think there is this misconception that it's all about the kind of big boys, but I think as time's going on, the focus is now going towards in certain scenarios, SMEs, there's a lot of value, a lot of care in their approach.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, I just thought I'd get that one out there. So just as we go through, it's quite a number on the call just now, and Chris will be taking questions at the end. But if you've got questions as we go along, just throw them into the chat box as well. So, Chris, take it away. I'm really curious. I'm looking forward to this. Carry on.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stuart, and nice to meet you all. So today we're looking at providing some hopefully top tender tips. I think based on the audience and the feel that we've got already, there'll be something for everyone in this, from giving you those kind of starter for 10 tips for those people on the call that have got about to start a tender, maybe give you some kind of ideas. For those seasoned pros, there could be some little nuggets in there as well. So feel free to challenge me as we go as well on that. So I know Stuart said that we'll take questions at the end, but I think one of the things that I find from doing these sessions is that I want it to be a bit more of a discussion than death by PowerPoint. In terms of any kind of feedback around, well, that didn't work for me, or this has worked for me, and that's kind of really useful to kind of have that discussion. Also saves my voice at times as well. But obviously, I'm looking here to share my kind of insights, both from a procurement and bidding expertise as well, to hopefully take you away from this Tuesday evening with some bits that you can take away. So how I've broken this presentation up is into three kind of component parts. What is the public sector, and how and why does it do things? Because it's death by paperwork, isn't it? For those people that look to tenders, there's documents after document that you kind of got to go through. Why is that? How you then, so you decide that you want to maybe look at the public sector, but how do you find opportunities? Is there mechanisms out there to support you? And then maybe hopefully some really useful, valuable bidding tips, and that's kind of from the qualification process to starting the bidding process internally, in terms of the physical writing, the reviewing. All that is a really important part of the process. It's not just the writing. There's other component parts that are just as important as the writing that will help you win more work. Okay, so just a quick background on myself. My background is actually in public sector procurement. So these tenders that you either respond to or that you are interested in responding to, I've been doing that for over 16 years now. I've worked for organisations that you may know, like Crown Commercial Service, NHS Supply Chain, responsible for all that tender process. So speaking to suppliers in the marketplace to understand how and why you do things, understand it from the stakeholder perspective, run the procurement process, evaluate bids, moderate, so getting evaluators in the room and trying to get them to agree on a score. I've done all that process, and then when the framework or the contract's being put in place, I've been responsible for it. So that full 360 process I've been responsible for. 5 years ago, I set up Bid Management Services because when I was evaluating bids, there was clearly people with a good product or service, but they couldn't articulate it in a way that the public sector wanted in a box, or, you know, it felt like at times like a dissertation. And it was just something I felt that people had good product or service, they just couldn't articulate. So I wondered whether or not there was a way of helping people.
This sounds to me like, I think we talked about this before, it's almost as if the tender and the tender language is written in code or a code that needs to be decoded so that you're answering the question in the correct way. Is that a good way to put it?
No, exactly. It's like doing homework, and doing like essays. It's how you answer the question. And if you think about, you're doing GCSEs or A levels, and you had that grading system, A, B, C, D, and to get an A, you need to do this. It's the same with tenders. They give you a qualification, they give you a scoring matrix out of 10 or whatever. To score a 10, you need to do this, and it's kind of black and white, really, from that standpoint. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities, and as you say, decoding is a really good way of phrasing it.
Excellent. Okay, carry on.
So yeah, we support all range of organizations, from small micro organizations that are starting out all the way through to kind of large organizations, and that's reviewing bids, that's doing the bid writing for them, or just being that critical friend along the process as and when needed. Our success rate for public sector frameworks is 75% as well. I think it's also important to say that I'm still involved in procurement. I've done some work for Fusion 21 and Pagabo and Bristol City Council, because it's important that if I'm helping people and consulting, I'm up to date with what's going on. And particularly with the new procurement regulations coming into place in October later this year, I need to be at the forefront and understanding what's going on and how it's going to change for suppliers. Right, so in terms of the public sector, because it's basically spending public money, they have to go through an open and fair and transparent process. So basically sharing documentation with anyone that's potentially interested. Obviously we exited Europe, and that's why the new procurement regulations coming into place. But at that time, anyone in Europe could potentially bid for any UK public sector work, or particularly in England and Wales. So all documentation is put out, so everyone is given that fair and transparent process. They use tender portals as well, so that information during that tender process is shared fairly and transparently, and no conversations can take place during that tender process. So it's done in an open and fair and transparent way. At the end of the process, you get your feedback to say your score and the feedback from the evaluators. So there is that robust and transparent process. But that doesn't make it any easier for yourselves looking to tender. If you think there's somewhere in the region of 40,000 different public sector organisations, ranging from, you know, local authorities, local councils, or the NHS trusts, colleges, all that type of organisations out there, all that have got to buy products and services. They reckon in the last couple of years that average spend on goods and services is 300 billion. That's a massive, massive amount of money. And if there wasn't that open and fair and transparent process, and I'll be a bit of tongue in cheek, I'll say there's an open, fair, transparent process apart from in unnatural situations like COVID, where there was obviously the Tory fast lane, for want of a better phrase. But other than that, it's a fair and transparent way, because when the procurement decision is made, there is that opportunity to challenge if someone feels aggrieved with the way that the process has been ran, or the feedback that you've been given, or the score. So again, that's why if you hear about the open, fair and transparent, that's kind of why, because it's embedded in the whole of the process. But it's still complex. There's no one route to market. So if I'm a local council, I'm not mandated by anyone to say I've got to use this framework or I've got to use these suppliers. I can do kind of within the procurement rules anything that I want to do, which makes it increasingly difficult for suppliers to say, well, what should I target as an opportunity? Where am I going to get the best bang from a buck? It makes it increasingly difficult. And then the themes that are really important at the moment within the public sector, I spoke about social value before, and that's obviously around local employment, local regional development, using local suppliers. That has a minimum for central government tenders of 10%. But we've seen recently with local councils, one actually in the Northwest, put a tender out within the last 6 months that had social value at 30%. So with that type of percentage, it's not necessarily price that becomes more important. It's actually your social value and demonstrating the value that you will bring to that region in terms of employing people, using local suppliers, all that type of stuff. And again, a link to social value, but it's kind of categorized separately at the moment. Net zero, having a carbon reduction plan, understanding what your carbon emissions are and what's your transition plan to net zero by 2050 if you're going for tenders in England, and that's for tenders over 5 million, or in Scotland it's 2045. So I don't know in terms of the audience whether or not you've got carbon reduction plans, or if you're particularly being asked by tier one contractors whether or not you've got one. And we've had some feedback from SMEs ourselves that people like Kia are asking them on a project by project basis to tell them the carbon emissions, and they just don't know where to start. So yeah, it's a complex sector with loads of different demands. And then with the exit of the from the European Union, the new reforms are due in October. So in terms of what that means for suppliers, I think the pressure really, if I'm honest, is on the buyers. There's more notices. So for example, of future opportunities, of pipeline, it's basically giving fuller visibility to suppliers about opportunities. It's also having to demonstrate adherence to KPIs. So for contracts, in the millions, contracting authority, so public sector organisations, will have to show how that contract is performing. How is that supplier performing? So typically, whereby a public sector organisation might have extended a contract, they even though the supplier was potentially poorly performing, there'd be no opportunity to do that when their KPIs are being demonstrated and shared. Okay. So I've kind of touched on this, but just to give you a feel, let's say in excess of 40,000 public sector organizations, depending on the level of spend, they have to go through some sort of procurement process. Obviously, the bigger the spend, the more complex that process is. And even charities are included in the public sector as well. And they've got their own rules. You've got obviously the NHS, education, housing associations, quite a raft of organisations there. I wanted to quickly talk around how they actually physically can purchase goods and services. So a lot of organisations access frameworks. I think, as I said before, I work for organisations like Crown Commercial Service and NHS Supply Chain, and what they did was look at common goods and services and look to put in frameworks using the buying power of the public sector, and then to make it easier for public sector and small organisations to access. So if I'm spending over £160,000, I've got to kind of run a procurement process which is quite complex. However, if there's a public sector framework there, the process probably reduces the process from about 3 months. Makes it easy for suppliers because the process is less convoluted, provided I'm on that framework. So, as I said before, I'm a contracting authority, I'm a public sector organisation. I've got a number of different routes I can use. I can access frameworks. I can run a procurement process myself for a single supplier. I can set up my own framework. I can set up what's known as a dynamic purchasing system, and that's where the process is alive for the duration of a DPS. So that is typically between 5 and 10 years. Whereas if it's a framework, if you don't get on that framework, you're typically locked out for between 2 and 4 years. So we're seeing a lot of DPSs at the moment, particularly for new areas where there's potentially emerging suppliers out there or people developing a new innovative solution. Stuart, you come off mute if you got a question.
Yeah, just one thing caught my eye that I wanted to share. This when I had my business, many competitions came into the framework agreement quite a lot, and this kind of frustrated me because when we went on to the framework agreement, we were, and this is just a warning for people who have not done contracts before to be mindful of this. When we went on to the framework agreement, we were asked to supply prices for what they refer to as a basket of goods. And we've submitted the price for the specification for this basket of goods, and we were awarded the contract and became one of maybe 8 suppliers on a framework agreement. And then to our frustration, the mini competitions then come out for basically everything that's on the framework agreement. So you've then got to put a price back in. And then what we noticed that we were getting nowhere near the what we quoted for on the basket of goods. It was invariably 20 to 25% less than what we quoted for. So it seemed to be a bit of a race to the bottom. And we ended up coming out of a lot of framework agreements because of that. Is that still the way it works, Chris, around the minimum the mini competitions, that the price you actually put in to get the framework and agreement can actually become pie in the sky?
Yeah, I mean, it's initially used, Stuart, as a mechanism to compare apples with apples, because with a framework, it's basically, I guess, for want of a better phrase, a preferred supplier list. So rather than your local school having to go out to 50 plus suppliers that offer hard FM services, you can go to a framework that's got, maybe between 5 and 10. So that means that you've got less bids to review. The pricing, is potentially more competitive than, if you kind of gone direct. But during that tender process, they need to be able to compare apples with apples. So it could be a day rate, it could be supply and fit percentage, it could be a range of different things. But it's one of them whereby it's really important to read the minutiae in that tender document as to how that pricing is. Is it a ceiling? You know, what's the percentage of expected kind of call-offs? Or, for example, we have seen frameworks out there that basically give 100% of the direct awards to the winning bidder based on that price and quality split. So yeah, it is being a bit kind of clever in your pricing. Do you kind of go in at a ceiling to give yourself some flexibility underneath, or do you go in at a rate whereby that's the rate no matter what?
Interesting. Okay, it's just to make people aware that many competitions, sorry, framework agreements do not necessarily mean that you're going to get all this work coming in. We certainly preferred, and Titha, and our preference was to go for things like at the time Highland Council, which was a soulless contract, much more easy to control. So I just wanted to share that experience. Back to you, Chris.
No, I think it's a really good point. And that kind of comes with your strategy, you know, based on your learnings, because I think there is a general misconception out there, and we were talking this before everyone kind of joined us, Stuart, that once people were on a framework, the business kind of came in, and unfortunately that's not the case. It's kind of like you've done half the job. And I could do a presentation or a discussion or workshop on, you know, that how best to kind of, once you're on a framework, how can you maximize your place. But in effect, it's another income stream, and you've got to do your marketing, you've got to get people, your boots on the street, to kind of build that relationship with the public sector, and push people through frameworks, really. Obviously frameworks are easier to get onto versus contracts, where potentially, you know, you've got 1 in 10 chance of being successful. If you've not got a relationship with that kind of local council or that school or whoever, then again, it's going to be more difficult. If you're new to the public sector, frameworks are quite a good way, or DPSs are a good way to kind of start off, particularly in your local region, and then build from there. Okay, so you decided you quite fancy the look of the public sector. How do you find the opportunities? And this depends, really. I've listed kind of a few, and we'll obviously send the slide deck out after the session. And there's links, you know, if you click on each of them. So the digital marketplaces is primarily for IT services, if people are looking for IT services. Contracts Finder is for contracts over £12,000. Finder Tender Services is for higher value opportunities, typically over £140,000. For EU opportunities, a lot of it was kind of tenders electronic daily. And then there are links to kind of becoming on the your local council's preferred supplier list as well. But with 44,000 organisations, and if I typed in construction, hard FM, or something that is like a Google search, I'm going to get reams and reams of opportunities. I can filter, you know, based on region or the date that it was kind of launched, or when the tender is due. But if I'm just typing in construction, I'm going to get reams and reams of results, and it's quite timely. And fitting this in, you know, unless you've got a tender manager, is kind of difficult. So there are, and people probably know this already, but there are paid tender portals out there that will bring you daily alerts, that find opportunities for you. You can look back historically about, you know, opportunities, what the, you know, even who won them, who are your competitors in the region, you know, what framework values kind of gone through, and then that brings it forward as to when they're likely to go out to tender again. And you can develop a 12 to 18-month tender pipeline of potential opportunities. You could even reach out to some of those organisations to say, I saw you did a tender 2 or 3 years ago. Are you looking to put a new framework out? Can you add me to the list of potential suppliers when you start to look at opportunities? Start that relationship early as well. So there's some good opportunities to look at a paid service as well. But those, if I was asking, for a starter for 10, have a look at Contracts Finder and Find a Tender Service. Just to give you a feel, as I say, you can search based on keywords, you can search based on region, I think you can even search based on value. And obviously, the bigger the value, the more complex and requirements that could be built into that tender. But just to give you a feel, those are kind of a good kind of starting base. Right, so you decided you want to go in the public sector. You've used a tender system to find an opportunity. You've registered on that tender portal and you've downloaded all the reams of documents. What do you do next? And for a lot of people, they just kind of they just go for it, and that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But what we're recommending now is actually going for less tenders and the right ones. And what I've tried to do is give you some ideas around some of the things that you kind of need to consider. We've talked about building a pipeline based on some tender opportunities. So things that you might look at the value of the contract, the location. So if you're based in Merseyside and it's based in London, you're not going to be the most cost effective, potentially, with travel, overnight stays and things like that, potentially, and it could be a headache to manage. What are the customer requirements within that tender? So there's obviously the components typically of a tender will be price and quality, and obviously there's the social value, which is sometimes included in quality. Now, if you know that that you kind of put yourself as a gold standard from a service perspective, and the price of this tender that you've spotted is 60 to 70%, then potentially you know that the client's looking for a low-cost solution, and that might not be the right bid to go for. However, if quality is 70 to 80% and price is only 20%, then you know that quality is important to them, and that may be something that you want to look at. Also, within the tender documentation will be the kind of scoring guide, and that could be out of 100, it could be out of 10, it could be out of 5, and it will say to score 5 you must do this. So I'd also recommend you having a look at that scoring guide, and that's how they're evaluating these quality questions. And it could be to meet and exceed the specification. It could be for X number of contract examples. Have a real good look at that to make sure that whatever you decide to go for, that you can evidence those contract examples or show where you've exceeded the specification or show where you've delivered efficiencies in terms of maybe cost savings, or the requirement said you've got to deliver this in 12 weeks, but you delivered it in 10 and it saved X, Y, and Z. Stuart, you come off mute again. You got a question?
Yeah, Chris, there's a question just coming from Jordan, and Jordan's asked, where would the scoring guide generally be? So this is also referred to as weighting, as not waiting as in sitting twiddling your thumbs, but waiting.
Yeah.
So where would the scoring guide generally be, Chris? Where would you find that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when I download documents, the main document, there's 2 documents I would probably look for. One is called the Invitation to Tender, or ITT, because the public sector love 3-letter acronyms, TLAs. So I look at that, and the ITT will say, right, this is the timeline. So we've launched the tender on this date. The clarification deadline is this date. You got to submit your tender by this date time. This is the tender portal that we're using. And as you say, the weighting is the price and quality split, and then the scoring guide will be how the quality questions will be scored. Okay. So we decided from the tender documentation, it looks like something of interest. How does it align to your strategy, your business strategy? Is it the right fit from a public sector perspective, or what the client's trying to achieve? Can you win it? Are you realistically going to win it? Do you offer the right price point? Do you know who else is likely to bid for this? And do you know commercially you are better, or do you know that you offer something that no one else knows? Have you got an existing relationship with the client? All those types of things come into this. And don't be afraid to say no at this stage. There's nothing wrong in qualifying things out, because for more complex tenders, it's a 3 to 4 week process. Invariably, you've got business as usual activities to be doing. This causes headaches. So if a lot of this isn't like, you're not ticking boxes in your mind, this is the right opportunity, don't do it. That's the best advice I can give. Develop your own qualification criteria. I've tried to give you some ideas here around it, but every organization could be different about what's important to them. But hopefully that will give you a starter for 10. Okay, so you've qualified your bid, you're going to go for it. Now, what do you do? So again, what I'm trying to apply here is best practice, and this might not be achievable for everyone that's kind of on the call or the session today, but there may be bits that you can apply from the process. So typically we have a kickoff meeting and we develop a bid strategy document. So the bid strategy document is developed by the project manager, who's responsible for the delivery of submitting that tender on time and to a high standard. So the reason why we developed that document is that it includes all the key things that you'd expect to see. So the project timeline. So we talked about how the public sector tender organisation will have their timeline. Well, how do you deliver the tender back to them by the date? How do you ensure that the question that you ask your key questions to them by their deadline? So it breaks that project down. Who's going to be part of your process? So who's going to write? Who's going to write the bid? Who's going to support the writing? Who's going to review the bid? Who's ultimately going to sign it off? So basically, those people need to be in that meeting room, and that could be 1 or 2 people. It could be a multitude of people. It just depends on the tender, number of questions, who are the people that you might need to bring in. So health and safety could be one. HR could be one if TUPE's involved. You might want to bring in someone from finance from a commercial perspective. You may need someone from legal around any framework terms or things like that you're concerned about. Develop your win themes or unique selling points. What makes you different from the competition? So you agree those, you set those out, and then whoever writes them understands what needs to be included, and then you challenge yourselves to get evidence of that. So say that your typically delivery time is 2 weeks, shorter. Well, what's the value of that? Challenge yourself to say, well, that saves X percentage of time or X percentage of value. That's what gets you the higher marks typically. The so what. And one of the things that we do when we're in customer meetings, they say, well, our right first time rate is 95%. So what? Well, it means we're delivering value. So what? Well, it means the customer's happy with our service. So what? So you keep asking, so what? And the more times you ask it, you get some really good conversations, you get some really good outcomes, and then you need the evidence to back that up. Also, you need to consider the risks. So firstly, what are the risks to be able to submit this tender on time? What other work have we got on? But if we did win the work, and this is for a sole contract, what are the risks to us? Do we need to employ more people? Do we have to build more premises? All that type of stuff. So you kind of are managing that. And this bid strategy is a living and breathing document owned by the project manager, as I said. But as more information comes in, you're adding to it. It's an opportunity assessment then for senior managers who ultimately sign it off. You're bringing in the intelligence on the competitors. Who's going to compete? What are they going to be strong on? How can we counteract that? It's a session that typically, again, depending on the complexity of the tender, can be anything from an hour up to maybe 2 hours max. Stuart?
Can I just ask a question here? I get why the intelligence on your competitors is important to do, because you'll know what your competitors are strong and conversely what they're weak on and who you're up against. But how will you know? How will you know when you're going for a tender who else is tendering? I've never actually seen that before.
So I guess I'm looking at it from two perspectives. If I'm looking at it from you're on a framework already and it's a mini competition. So if you're on a specific lot, you'll know who's on that framework. I think if you are in a particular region and you're going for a local council tender, you can find out who's on the previous framework,
Yeah,
or
good point. Yeah.
who won the previous contract. So invariably they're likely to go again, and that probably gives you a bit more intelligence.
Chris, see when you're going for a tender, um, do they? I can't remember this. Do they tell you who the incumbent supplier actually is?
No, not typically.
Okay. So a wee bit of homework to find out. As you say, with a framework agreement, it's easier, but with actual SOLAS contract, then it's maybe a wee bit of digging.
Yeah, I mean, if there was a risk of your staff having to transfer over, they do have to provide requirement of TUPE information, including the staff, number of staff benefits, and the percentage of time that's on the contract. So you might be able to get a view of that. Invariably, sometimes information is slipped through. But that's the value of those tender portals. If I'm honest, there's a massive opportunity to get competitive intelligence there.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, so just to summarize that, there's a lot of value in doing this, getting it right from the start. If the process is right, the people are right, the timelines are right, you're going to put a good quality bid forward. Also, don't be afraid after that kind of kickoff meeting where everyone's kind of looked at it again, potentially. You've looked at those risks, you maybe looked at the competitors. Don't be afraid to requalify again and say no. That's been done. Also, we have what's called like a mid-bid review, which is typically around when the clarification deadline is due. We've submitted our questions, and at that point, depending on the answers, we may decide not to bid for it, or we've seen a clarification question which has blown us out of the water, or something like that. Appreciate time and value and efforts being put in, but the cost of then spending another 2 weeks on something that you're not going to win, or there's a framework term that's being put in or won't be revised. Again, don't be afraid to requalify. Also, are we prepared to go forward and take that risk? Again, those are the questions that you kind of need to have. But it's ultimately, before you start writing that bid, everyone's clear on why you're going for it and what are the key elements that you want to put into the bid. So, bid writing 101. So you've had the kickoff meeting, and whoever's writing it as part of their daily activity, or potentially at nights and stuff like that. What do you do? So our advice is to kind of split your time, 25% planning. So that's like how you're structuring the response. There are organizations that will have like a question and there'll be sub questions within it. That makes it easier. So you set your headings against that to mirror what's being asked. And then you kind of maybe bullet point it to say, right, these are the elements that I need to include under each heading. You then might have a look at the specification to kind of draw out anything that's really important, because the specification document is what I would call the pain point for the client. And the headings that they've got, the more that's in one section means that's where a lot of their pain points are. So yeah, have a look at the specification to kind of mirror what's being asked as well. Then start writing. You might want to use kind of previous content, but there is a danger with previous content, and that's why I put an exclamation mark against it, in that you need to make sure it's tailored to this client and what they're asking for. I have done bid reviews when people have used the previous response and kept the old client's name in. So yeah, there is definitely value in giving you a bit of structure or a bit of help, but don't rely on it. Tailor it. So that's 50% of your time. Have a look at reports that could be on websites or accessible, any policies, anything that's important to the client that are outside that tender documentation. That can give you some really useful intelligence that you can bring back, and added value, which typically gets you the higher marks. And then the other element is reviewing. So doing your own review of the document before you then send that out to the reviewer or the project manager. Don't be afraid when you're doing that planning before you start the drafting, which is a bulk amount of time, to check your understanding with someone, because it's a lonely world writing, and particularly when there's thousands of words that you've got to write, the worst thing you can do is start off on a completely different tangent. Also, what I say again, it might not be feasible for a lot of you. We typically do 2 to 3 drafts. And I'll take you through that kind of review process as well. But yeah, the first draft is usually within the first 1.5 to 2 weeks of the project timeline. The second draft is usually week 3, and then the final draft or polishing is week 4 of a typical 30 to 40-day tender process. Focus on shorter sentence structure. Any more words than 14, people will lose the thread of what you're trying to say. One of our writers typically writes about 3 sentences in one, and in 3 lines, and by the time I've reviewed it, I don't know the point that's being made, or I've lost the golden thread. So shorter sentences is a key takeaway from today. There is a reading statistic in Word. It's called Flash Reading Ease. So also try and make it sure that the language that you're using is easy to understand and from a grade school perspective, and reduce the number of passive sentences. And I mean, talk about positive language. We will do this. That's what I mean. It's not we should do this, we could do this. It is we will do this. This is what we're going to do. This is why we're going to do it. This is the value that you will get from us doing it this way. And this is some really good important points. So make sure that anyone that's either writing or reviewing reads and understands the specification from the client. Everyone should understand the evaluation criteria. So that's both the weighting, price and quality, but also that scoring guide. Do your research on the client as well. Understand the local area. Understand some of their priorities. They may have a procurement strategy. They may have some of their corporate strategies in there. Have a look the more value, the more reading around that you can do, the better. Also tailor your language in your response to what the client's looking for. We've seen it within the NHS. Sometimes NHS uses patient, sometimes they use the word user, sometimes they use the word service users. So replay the specification to them. It shows you understand it. Use wording that they have used in their own tender documents to describe what the solution is that you're going to do. Okay. This is very close to my heart because I do a lot of bid reviews with my procurement hat on. Again, this is on the basis that there's three drafts. So first draft is to make sure that whatever solution that you're providing is deliverable and accurate. So that could be someone that is operationally focused that would take that first draft. And again, if I was looking at it from a completion percentage, it would be around 50%. But the key important thing that that person is looking for is that if you won that bid, you could deliver it in the way that has been proposed. Because what some people don't realize is those quality questions form part of the contract. So the quality questions that you say, we will do this, this is how we're going to do it, that's what you'll be expected to deliver. Okay, so that, as I say, that's done between the first 1.5 to 2 weeks of the process. The second draft then is then looked at from the point of view of back to that, that kind of scoring guide. What is going to get us those higher marks? Do we provide that evidence there? Is there enough in there to score those higher marks? That's really kind of important. And that's getting it up from, say, 50% to kind of maybe 80-90%. That's really kind of key to kind of layer on. So you've got the proposed solution, it's in line with what you could deliver if you're successful. Now it's like layering on testimonials, evidence of delivering things for other clients, any efficiencies that you delivered, any evidence of going above and beyond the specification. It's just adding layers and layers and layers and challenge yourself to put more and more in. And then usually 3 days before submission, although the reality of it is it can be 24 hours before the deadline, that project sponsor, whoever that is, if it's the director, owner of the business, reviews it and signs it off. And that's trying to get it from that like 90% to 100%. So what's really key here, and we have seen this on projects, is that that project sponsor will look at this more from a sales language perspective or a branding perspective. And obviously here, it's been developed to answer the question, to provide evidence. So it's making sure that all the reviewers understand what's being asked of them and not looking at it from a marketing and branding perspective. Key thing here is once the project kind of kicked off, that those review dates are in people's diaries. And that could be sent on a certain date, and then a review face to face with the writer, or feedback and comments in documents. It can be done in a number of different ways. It's whatever works best based on time and what works best for those writers for that feedback. So I appreciate we have a few questions as we go, and obviously Stuart has asked some good ones as well. But has anyone got any kind of questions, any experiences that they'd like to kind of talk about as well, good or bad?
Just get any questions, either just shout out or stick it in the chat box if you've got any questions at all for this. So Charlie's got one. Can we have samples of winning bids, tenders, construction with confidential info redacted? Well, that's a good question, Chris. I don't know about that.
We could potentially do. We could give you the structure. So the question is this: we could potentially, what we call it, frameworking. and then you would then insert the information, if that makes sense. That's one thing we could potentially do. Yeah. Yeah, because yes, you can redact it, but I guess the other thing is from a client's perspective, there may be kind of USPs in there and things like that that they probably wouldn't want us to share as well. So that's probably why the frameworking and giving you that kind of structure to go off will probably be more advantageous, and obviously from a client perspective, protecting them.
Excellent. Chris, did you have another slide there with your contact details on it?
Yeah,
There
yeah,
we
I
go.
see. Yeah, so as Stuart said at the start, really, delighted to have the opportunity to kind of speak to you. Hope you found it kind of useful. We'd like to offer the opportunity for, a number of you to have some time with us to ask anything bid related, ranging from particular things that you struggle on, social value, net zero. It could be you just starting off and want some hints and tips, or just walking through that qualification process, anything. So the first 4 people that kind of contact us either on the mobile number or the email address will happily spend some time. If you do decide to email us, please put in what you'd be looking for, particularly ahead of that session as well. I think I might have had my first one actually. Yes,
Excellent.
I won't name names, but thank you.
That's good, because I was going to say, based on the question that Charlie just put in there, Charlie needs to get in there as well. Listen, here's a very interesting one. Lewis is just put in a very good question, actually. If you're going for a contract of, a particular value, do you have to have previous contracts of a similar or larger amount to be considered?
So
In other words, do you have
uh,
to have previous experience of contracts of that value? Good
so
question.
it's a very good question. So it depends on the client. They can do that. I've known with again, this isn't in the construction, but management consultancy framework that CCS does. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in it, and what they do is say you need 3 contract examples over this type of value. However, typically, if you're like a new supplier, you're being precluded from going for things. So there is in the supplier questionnaire, which also has other company information like your insurances, your accounts, and things like that. You ask for kind of 3 contract example, but it says if you don't have contract examples and you're a new entity, talk about like how you've done things previously and stuff like that. So I guess to answer it directly, there can be instances where there are limits to it, or certain standards that are needed, but there are also instances where, as long as you can explain how you demonstrated it in different ways. So it could be that you're a startup in the first 18 months, however, you've delivered contracts through in your previous employment, X, Y, and Z, or that you're going to prime it and then you're going to subcontract it with other parties and things like that. Every tender can be different.
That makes sense. Um, I know certainly when we went for one um, of our print contracts, so I had my printing business. That did come up in one of them, but only one. The rest of them, there wasn't any requirement. So, great question there.
No,
Anybody else get any
definitely.
other questions? Just conscious of time. Oh, here we go. What Sunny's saying. Um, that's it. Again, that's another good question. Just came in from Sunny there as well.
Yes.
Are these tips transferable to private sector contracts?
So I think in essence in terms of structuring your response, yes. However, we talked around how it's a bit of a closed process, so you can only ask questions on a portal. You can't speak to the client. In the private sector, you can have those conversations. You can potentially qualify it a little bit more. You could potentially negotiate and have conversations more so than the public sector scenario. So I would say in terms of the structuring, the preparation, yes, there are transferable elements to it.
Excellent. And Jordan's just sent a message saying there he's got the email sent into you, which is great. Sonny, just for you, one of the things that Chris and I were talking about is on one of the slides, um, the subscription websites. There was another one that wasn't there that Chris and I were talking about, and it's called Tracker Intelligence. Tracker Intelligence is a subscription service with BIP Solutions. BIP Solutions, Tracker Intelligence, and they seem to be quite good with private sector contracts as well. Just one word of caution though with BIP Solutions. They are brutal with their contract. I know a couple of people that have used them, and when you're in, you're in. Okay, so just be mindful when you sign up with them. They are completely inflexible with the contract. But that said, they are good at what they do. They used to have this is me showing my age here, Chris. They used to have a printed publication called Contracts Weekly, which is printed and posted out every week. Back in the Stone Age when we didn't have them online.
But it's a
Whereas
useful
now
point.
everything pretty much.
Yeah, it's a useful
Was that
point,
Chris?
Stuart. I say the BIP are very well connected in the public sector. We do use their software. It's probably one of the most expensive ones. So if you were looking to use it just for private sector, then there's value in there, and the historical opportunities, there's some really good stuff. However, the two that I put in that portal are probably a bit more manageable, between £500 and £1,000, which I think is at a better price point. I just noticed there's a question, and funny enough, Stuart, it's about a question that you asked me before we started.
ISO. Yes.
ISO.
Great question.
Yeah, definitely. So, funnily enough, we bid for work ourselves to provide bid and tendering support. And we went for one recently, and they wanted like a data protection and all this type of stuff for a contract value of £40,000. So we were able to explain our processes and policies, because it should say or equivalent, unless it's for something that is particular in your industry. So a health and safety one, I'd probably expect for construction, or CHAS and things like that. For ISO 9001, there's also Cyber Essentials, which is sometimes asked for. And it can be that they'll ask for equivalents, or with Cyber Essentials, I do know that sometimes they say at the point of awarding the contract, you need to have it. So, Lewis, to answer your question, again, it's on a tender by tender basis. However, the bigger the contract value, the more likely I think ISOs are likely to be needed. So if you're going for stuff under 100 grand, then potentially I don't think the requirement should ask for it, in my personal opinion.
Good answer. Good answer. I know that some of the recent ones that we went for, Chris, for the Power Within, it's asked about 9001, 14,001, and then it says or equivalent. Parminder, for our local authorities, we've had to be accredited, also consider it content. Yeah, that's exactly what Chris was saying earlier. There will be certain standards, such as safe contractor things, CHAS, Cyber Essentials based on it. But again, they'll be very clearly indicated right in the early stages. You're not going to get down 60 hours of work and then discover, oh shit, we've got to have 9001. It'll be very clearly indicated at the early stages. So again, that's a learning to make sure you read the full ITT so that you know what you're getting yourself in for. Anybody else get any other questions?
I think I'd also say, when in the tender opportunities, you find a contract or find a tender and stuff like that, there are things called PIN notices. So that's basically looking for expressions of interest. And if you can get in at that stage, you can maybe get a sense of what the client's looking for and qualify it before it even gets into tender stage, as well. And the more dialogue and the earlier you can get on in the process, the better of success.
Absolutely. Anybody else get any other questions, or will we wrap up at that? Chris, if you could send me an email of the presentation, I'll make sure I email it to everybody. The recording's going to be there as well. Anybody that's a Power Within client will have access to this on the Meet the Expert portals. So the recording's going to be there, but I'll also make sure the presentation's emailed out to everybody that attended and registered as well. You've got Chris's email, so if there's a question that comes up, I think I should have asked that, then email Chris. Anybody else get any other questions, or we'll wrap up at this? But I've got to say, Chris, this has been great. I've taken tons of notes here, especially that one about shorter sentences, because I noticed one of the bids that we did was a bit wordy.
Even my head of bid management, we have a joke around how many times when I'm reviewing, I'll say shorter sentence required, Katrina.
Yes.
You know, even
absolutely.
Because it's that, you know, if you're so far and you're just writing and stuff like that, sometimes even when you review it, you kind of, you've got that kind of syndrome, that white fuzz syndrome or whatever you call it. So that review process is so important, or even just having someone else just to check things for you.
Yeah, one of the things that I always did when we did our tenders is we asked the question with the answer and no more. I think sometimes when you give information they're not actually asking for, you can actually be making a rod for your own back. So I like the shorter questions. Excellent. Okay, any other questions, or will we wrap up at that? No, everybody happy? Excellent. Chris, that's been absolutely brilliant. Absolutely fantastic.
Thanks for the invite.
I'm pretty sure you're going to get the emails for people to take the free 30-minute. Absolutely brilliant. And this is maybe something I think we need to maybe expand on. I think we talked about this before. Maybe expand on this, because I think there's a lot of interest and a lot of fear around contracts as well. So, Chris, thanks very much for that.
Sorry, Stuart, just to say, if there is kind of particular topics you'd like us to cover in more detail, because obviously I've given you a bit of a whistle-stop tour, you know, and there's loads of different component parts. Stuart and I were potentially looking at like a masterclass, weren't we? So if there's certain elements that you'd like us to kind of maybe cover or whatever, then I'd like to tailor it rather than it being something that I think is important. So have a think about that.
Yeah, maybe that's something maybe that we could look at where what Charlie had actually said. Because Charlie had said there's samples of winning bids. You know, maybe you could have a kind of masterclass workshop where we're kind of presenting some samples of winning bids, with obviously the appropriate bits taken out. I maybe got a lot of value from that, because I think when actually people see how things are structured, it would make a lot more sense.
Yeah, and that's something that we've done as well, even on like social value, you know, kind of how to structure a response and things like that, and frameworking it and then giving feedback, you know, or looking at a previous response and saying, well, what's good about that? How would you improve it? And things like that. We can make it a bit more interactive, because that's how people learn, based on kind of looking at things and giving
100%. And you can maybe get a standard question and then have an answer. You say that this is a good answer and this is not a good answer. So I think there's a lot we can do there, Chris. That's something we could work on after the summer holidays. Away some summer holidays. It's 9 degrees up here just now, for God's sake. Excellent. Okay, thank you, everybody. That's been absolutely fantastic. Keep your eyes peeled, folks, on the emails and WhatsApp group, because I'm pretty sure we're going to be coming back for an all singing, all dancing workshop. Chris, once again, thanks very much, and thanks everybody else for attending. Absolutely brilliant. Have a pleasant evening.
Appreciate everyone's time. Enjoy your evening. Bye now.
See ya. Thanks. Bye-bye.